Sanctions are backfiring and pushing the world to Bitcoin. For most of history, wars and politics shaped the rise and fall of money, but today something quieter is happening, something hidden. Sanctions, those invisible weapons used by governments, are reshaping the global economy in ways the average person never sees. And behind the curtain, they're pushing the world toward Bitcoin. To understand this, we need to start with the nature of sanctions themselves. Sanctions are not bombs. They're not tanks. They're restrictions on trade, money, and access to the global financial system. They are a way to starve an enemy without ever firing a shot. When the US or its allies cut off a country from SWIFT, the international payment system, it's like cutting oxygen from a fire. Banks freeze, trade halts, and entire economies suffocate. But something else begins to happen. People look for ways around the system. Think about it. For thousands of years, power has flowed to whoever controlled the money. Empires taxed in gold, nations printed paper, banks held ledgers. But sanctions reveal the fragility of that control. Because the moment you cut someone off, they start searching for money that cannot be cut. That's where Bitcoin slips into the story. At first, it's small, tiny transactions, whispers in the dark corners of the internet. But when sanctions squeeze tighter, Bitcoin becomes more than an investment. It becomes survival. Take Iran. Cut off from the dollar system, its citizens turned to Bitcoin mining using cheap energy. Despite bans, despite restrictions, Bitcoin kept flowing. It became a lifeline, a shadow economy beyond the reach of sanctions. Or look at Venezuela. Crushed by hyperinflation, punished by international isolation, ordinary people used Bitcoin and stablecoins to buy food, medicine, and shelter. When the local currency became worthless paper, Bitcoin became hope. And then, Russia. After the invasion of Ukraine, the West unleashed historic sanctions. Banks frozen, assets seized, trillions locked away. But here's the hidden truth. While governments cut off access to the dollar, Russians, both citizens and businesses, turned to Bitcoin. Not because they believed in it ideologically, but because sanctions left them no choice. It's the same pattern, again and again. Sanctions create pressure, pressure creates innovation, and the innovation leads straight into the arms of Bitcoin. But here's what no one tells you. Sanctions don't just push countries toward Bitcoin. They push individuals, small businesses, everyday families. People who can no longer send money across borders. People who are punished not for war, but for where they happen to live. A student in Iran trying to pay tuition abroad, a family in Lebanon trying to receive remittances, a protester in Belarus trying to fund resistance without being traced. For them, sanctions aren't a political weapon. They're a prison, and Bitcoin is the key. This is the hidden story of adoption. It doesn't come from Wall Street suits or Silicon Valley billionaires. It comes from the shadows of sanctions, from people forced to choose between compliance and survival. And survival always wins. But think about the bigger picture. Every time a country is cut off from SWIFT, every time a population is squeezed by sanctions, Bitcoin gains new users, new believers, not because they wanted it, but because they needed it. This is why Bitcoin adoption is accelerating faster than most realize, not just in the West, not just as a speculative investment, but in the shadows where sanctions bite hardest. And here's the twist. The very weapon the West uses to maintain control, the sanction, may be the tool that destroys their control altogether. Because the more sanctions push people away from the dollar system, the more people discover a parallel system, one that doesn't ask permission, one that doesn't freeze your account, one that doesn't care about borders, politics, or power. Bitcoin. Now imagine this pattern repeating. Iran, Venezuela, Russia, Turkey, Nigeria, each under pressure, each turning toward alternatives. Every sanction inadvertently spreading the idea of borderless money. The mainstream narrative won't tell you this. They say sanctions weaken enemies. But in reality, sanctions may be planting the seeds of Bitcoin's inevitability. They are quietly onboarding millions into a parallel economy. And here's the part that should make you pause. Sanctions don't just punish foreign nations, they expose the fragility of your own money too. Because if a government can freeze the wealth of a country, what makes you think they can't freeze yours? Ask the Canadian truckers who had their bank accounts shut down during protests. Ask activists whose donations were blocked. Ask dissidents worldwide who've watched their life savings vanish with one government decree. Sanctions aren't just over there, they're a warning for all of us. And Bitcoin is the escape hatch. This is why so many people call Bitcoin apolitical money. It doesn't choose sides, it doesn't bend to sanctions, it simply exists, like digital gold, immune to borders and decrees. But here's the secret most don't realize. Sanctions are accelerating this shift. Every time the dollar is weaponized, Bitcoin becomes stronger. Every block, every transaction, every miner adds to the unstoppable momentum. So the real question is not, will sanctions drive Bitcoin adoption? That's already happening. The real question is, at what point does the world tip? At what point does the shadow economy become the real economy? At what point do nations themselves embrace Bitcoin openly, not just as an escape from sanctions, but as a foundation for a new monetary order? We may be closer than you think. Countries like El Salvador have already taken the leap. Others are quietly experimenting. And as sanctions continue to spread, so too does the search for neutral money. In the end, sanctions are supposed to isolate, but in reality, they connect people to something greater. They connect them to Bitcoin. This is the hidden history unfolding right now. Not on Wall Street, not in Washington, but in the sanctioned shadows of the world, where people discover freedom, not by choice, but by necessity. And when future historians look back, they may say, sanctions, meant to preserve the dollar system, were the very force that destroyed it and birthed something new, something unstoppable, something inevitable. Bitcoin. If you've watched this far, you're already ahead of the curve. You're seeing the patterns others miss. You're connecting the dots before they become headlines. And that knowledge is powerful because while most are distracted by price charts and speculation, you understand the deeper story, the story of sanctions, control, and freedom. So here's my question for you. When the next wave of sanctions hits, when the next country is cut off, the next economy strangled, what side of history will you be on? The side waiting for permission, or the side that already knows that Bitcoin is the money no one can stop? This is hidden knowledge, but it won't stay hidden forever. Soon the world will see it. And when they do, Bitcoin adoption will no longer be optional. It will be inevitable. If you found this video valuable, if you enjoy exploring Bitcoin from first principles, hit like, share this with a friend who needs to see it, and subscribe for more videos that go deeper than the hype. Because the story of sanctions and Bitcoin isn't just a headline, it's the story of our future. And you are now part of it.